Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I'm going to be doing a topic that probably everyone else has already covered to death, and I have a lot to say on this topic to kind of further the discussion and give you some more insight into my own personal thoughts and perspective, especially in comparing it to, well, everyone else's, because I do think I have some unique and interesting perspectives. So this is going to be covering the August 23rd, 2025 ban and restriction update, and these are my predictions for it. So I am just going to put the forward disclaimer that not everything on this list I'm expecting to get hit, but everything on this list reasonably actually could get hit in some capacity. It just depends on what Bandai wants to do and how far they want to take things in terms of curving decks or killing decks. So with that disclaimer out of the way, why do cards even get banned to begin with? Obviously, cards get banned because they're super strong, but when it comes to Bandai's track record and their explanations that they gave on their website, you could go through and read them all yourself, and you could kind of connect the dots to four main reasons in terms of why cards get banned and limited to begin with. So these are in no particular order, and that's going to be because they're presenting a speed or tempo issue, making the game or deck move faster than intended, which puts a lot of stress and strain on, well, everything else to either catch up or get left behind, and, well, the majority of decks in these examples tend to get left behind. So in order to balance the game, they need to fix those speed and tempo issues that those cards are causing, which is why they get hit. Then another big reason is because of loops and unhealthy combos in gameplay. So this one is a little bit more broad, but essentially if you're doing a repeatable action that also doesn't really have a lot of interaction to it, that's tending to lead to unhealthy gameplay, and why cards also get hit for that, because it's just not fun playing against these style of decks and these style of gameplays. Then the next reason is going to be because the card is just generically too good and or limits future card design. So it's hard to make new cards when what you're currently already playing with is already just so much better than what they reasonably can create. And it makes them walk on eggshells in terms of future card design, because now they have to A, make cards that are competing with what we're already using, and to B, make it so that the cards that they're making isn't going to break anything else in the future. So it just makes it so they're very hard to design around and limits what they could possibly make, which is why they end up on this list. And then the last reason, which really isn't a commonly used reason, is fun factor. We've only had like maybe a very, very small handful of cards on this list get hit because of that fun factor. And usually the fun factor cards are the ones that eventually get taken off the list, but not all the time, because usually fun is, well, subjective, and, well, they're trying to preserve the fun, and a card like Ice Wall right now is the only card on the ban and restriction list that has that definition, because it just leads to unfun gameplay. So as far as the current power level of the game, I think that 2 ban and restriction updates a year is really not good enough. They do it basically once in the summer, once in the winter, technically. Yeah, we don't get enough bans and restrictions, and if Bandai actually wants to make the game healthier, I think they need to make a proactive and conscientious decision on wanting to ban and restrict cards more, especially if they're just going to be printing more and more high power cards as power creep continues to progress. Then this is clearly not enough, and I think that every main set, which is basically every 3 months, Bandai should look and reevaluate the ban and restriction list, so that way they can actually let sets and formats breathe and not get completely ruined by unfun decks that we've seen for arguably way too long. So, as far as what actually needs to get banned and limited, I know I'm going to be yapping a little bit before I actually get into the bulk of the list, and the list is actually pretty long in my perspective, and knowing what the previous meta was doing can give us some insight as far as what Bandai is most likely going to be hitting. So when we take a look at where the EX9 and BT21 meta came from, we had 5 very clear, powerful decks. So we had the Growl X engine basically be abused in a numerous amount of decks, but it didn't really matter what that engine was doing for those decks because it just all played exactly the same for the most part. So that made about 30% of the previous meta. Royal Knights was about 18% of the previous meta. Sakuyamon was 12%. Imperial, the blue-green version, was about 7%, and Purple Hybrids, being the 5th best deck, was about 5%. So you could really start to see this huge drop-off between 3rd and 4th place when it comes to the meta share that they had. It's not like super dramatic, but it's dramatic enough to where it's kind of noticeable, and the format really was ruled by the first 3 decks. And 4 and 5 were just the subsequent best decks from the last meta that still are shockingly, which is not really a surprise, good today. So between all 5 of those decks, that made about 72% of the meta, and based on my previous metadata that I've covered and tracked, usually when a single deck hits around 30%, that's reaching problematic territory where the game starts to be warped by that one singular deck, and the game kind of just becomes less fun as a result, because it's just shutting out the majority of what could be played, further widening the gap between Tier 1 and Tier 2. And that's kind of like the big issue right now, is the gap between what's actually playable and what's reasonably playable is very large. So that's kind of why this ban and restriction list is needed, but I know a lot of people, because we had gotten a couple of cards taken off the ban and restriction list, they want more cards off the ban and restriction list. And should anything actually come off the ban and restriction list? In my personal opinion, no. Nothing really should come off the ban and restriction list because it was powerful enough to be put there in the first place. And if you're thinking, oh, well, this card's not really a problem anymore, well, you're just admitting that the game is actually a big problem. And if you're wanting broken cards to be coming back because you don't think that they will be a problem or they couldn't be a problem, then that kind of is just silly thinking in my perspective, and it's just opening the doors for those cards to be a potential problem again, leading to their inevitable rebanning. Sure, the couple of examples that we have really didn't do anything, but again, new and shiny syndrome leads us to believe that, oh, well, if it's okay if nobody's playing with it, but realistically, it's not okay, because as TCG players, we'll find a way to find the most broken stuff, and then once that stuff becomes popular, then it becomes the meta, and then it's just a never-ending vicious cycle. So while cards could reasonably come back based on the power level of the game, I do not think that they should. And again, it's just admitting to the fault of the game for where the current power level is if we want previously broken cards to be coming back, because we don't think that they will have an impact. So, as far as the actual bans and restrictions, this is going to be probably the least interesting part, because I'm sure you've heard this on multiple YouTube channels and videos before, but I'm just going to go over the big decks and kind of show off the obvious problematic cards and kind of just talk about them a little bit. So, from the number 1 deck, which is the Growl Loop deck, these are the obvious cards that reasonably should be hit in some capacity or could be hit in some capacity. Again, I don't know how deep Bandai is going to go into hitting cards. I don't necessarily think all of these are going to get hit, but at least 2 of them probably should be. So Growlmon X Antibody is the number 1 card that 100% should get hit on this list next to Gravity Crush. Gravity Crush is just a 0-cost option that just gives us too much memory. Very easy to see why that's good, especially if the downside really isn't a downside, because we're winning the game because of the amount of memory that we gained. And even though it doesn't have a security effect, the amount of memory is just that large. And because things are so much cheaper and move so much quicker and more efficiently than they ever have before, it's just way more extra memory to do more things, to abuse in more ways. So a little bit of memory actually goes a long way, which is why Gravity Crush needs to basically leave the game at this point. But going back to Growl X Antibody, outside of Gravity Crush, this is the number one card because, again, looking at the reasons why it's not necessarily a tempo issue. I mean, it kind of is with the consistency that the card is also offering in terms of helping it set up everything, but it's more of the fact that it's the unhealthy gameplay portion where it's creating this loop because of its on delete ability to be able to replay a Guilmon, which the Guilmon in question 9 out of 10 times is going to be the Rush Guilmon, because you're going to be swinging with the level 4 or level 5, and then you're going to delete the level 4 or level 5 and play out the Rush Guilmon, so that way you could do an additional check or Evo and do more checks that way, utilizing something else. So it's very easy why people would also want the Rush Guilmon out of the way, but Rush Guilmon isn't necessarily as problematic. It's still a strong card, don't get me wrong. It's still semi-problematic, but it's not as problematic without the Growlmon X Antibody being able to constantly revive it for basically nothing. And then Gallantmon on here is just an example of self-deletion. So what the deck started to do with Megidramon, they realized, oh, Promo Gallantmon can just self-delete a lot of Digimon to enable all of our on-delete effects so we could put even more pressure. So this is why they're using level 5s and level 6s that reach certain DP thresholds, especially that combo and synergize with on-delete effects, so that way this Promo Gallantmon can take advantage of that and act as a self-deleting target that also just doesn't really cost anything. So that's a huge aspect on why Promo Gallantmon is being played. It's basically like the new Calling of Darkness, where it's just a cheap self-deleter to enable a lot of our on-delete effects ourselves, while also being a rush and block body to put even more pressure onto the opponent. So I could see any one of these cards leaving, but the two most obvious picks is going to be Growlmon and Gravity Crush from this deck. So next we have Royal Knights. This one is it's a really interesting deck to look at because it is a toolbox style deck, so it's not playing a whole lot of cards in that high of quantities, and it's really hard to figure out what individual Royal Knights to take away from the deck that'll actually impact it meaningfully without killing it. Obviously, the old WinCon was with the BT13 Omnimon, and the new WinCon is utilizing the BT20 Omnimon X Antibody, and I feel like these three cards are the ones that are most likely going to end up being restricted in some capacity. Royal Knights of the Purge is the number one pick for a lot of people, probably myself included, because of the fact that it just was not very well future-proofed. We do have a lot more Royal Knights with when attacking abilities that we could trigger, so even though we're not gaining the on-play effects, we're still gaining a lot of value to do stuff for utilizing Royal Knights of the Purge. So it just helps with the overall consistency of the deck. It sets up your Yggdrasil with an inheritable that you could then pull out utilizing its other main ability to put lots of pressure onto the opponent, all for that inheritable to probably go back right underneath, or with the second card on this list, Last Guardian, it might not even leave the field. So you could keep it around for a couple of turns and have it be an absolute menace and lock the opponent out of the game. So Royal Knights of the Purge, it being the number one pick, the Last Guardian being their second option is the number two pick, because this just offers even more consistency for less investment because of just how Yggdrasil works. Obviously, the biggest problem of the deck is probably Yggdrasil, but if you kill Yggdrasil, you just kill the entire deck. We might get a new Yggdrasil, which means they might do it, but I really don't think that they're going to do that. Yggdrasil was just very poorly designed in terms of future-proofing because of how Aces worked, and again, looking at Royal Knights of the Purge and all the future cards with how on-attack effects work. So, but Last Guardian essentially is in this new wave of support that's increasing the deck's consistency for very little cost. So if you hurt its consistency, then maybe it just slows down enough because it's not able to put all of its pieces together, which allows other decks to kind of have room and the ability to try to fight back and close out the game before it's able to do its whole shenanigans. Then the protection on your Omnimon cards is also just really, really strong because it's Omni Protection, and again, because we don't have ways to actually interact with delayed cards in a meaningful capacity. It just means that this card is 100% uninteractable for the majority of decks, and it's just super good. And the security ability, being able to set up an Omekamon or Cool Boy, most of the time you're going to want to set up the Omekamon, is just really strong of a security ability to fight through, because then you have to fight through Omekamon, and that's why Omekamon is the third card on this list, because this is basically just making it very hard to interact with Royal Knights and try to close out games, because if they try to get rid of the Omekamon, then out comes Omni X, and then Omni X basically wrecks the entire field. And then they can't get rid of Omni X, and then they kind of just lose because of basically seeing Omekamon. So it's just a very difficult card to fight through, especially since the deck has more ways to be able to cheat this card out into play. So they don't even necessarily need to play it itself. It's also a blocker, so it can stave off damage while enabling its own game plan without needing any like self-deletion type effects. So it's just a very strong and disruptive card that also is very hard to interact with. So, moving on from Royal Knights, we have Sakuyamon as the third deck, and this deck definitely needs restrictions. There's probably more that I would like to put on here, but looking and trying to narrow things down, I think these are the three most likely cards that'll end up getting hit. So, the number one pick out of this deck is 100% the BT17 Taumon. So, this card just allows you to use any, like literally any option, and reduce its play cost by 2, which means it's most likely going to be free or 1. So it's just very little investment for lots of output, because we do have cards like Digivolution Plugin S and the Scrambles that only cost 2, that basically now make this card, when Digivolving, Digivolve for free. And as we've seen, Digivolving for free is very, very good, especially since that you could even Digivolve into this card for basically next to nothing, utilizing some of the other cards. So it just means that you're getting value on top of value on top of value, and it allows you to speed and accelerate the deck to an unhealthy level, essentially allowing you to form a mega level Digimon in a single turn off of virtually no memory required. On top of the fact that its when attacking effect also kind of is the same as its when Digivolving effect, allowing you to use even more options or plugins for essentially free. Again, just means that you could combo chain and get up into even higher stage Digimon, or find ways to further disrupt the opponent, or do whatever else that your option lineup is going to be doing. So it's just a way too strong card at giving you way too much extra tempo. And again, looking at that ban and restriction list reason, tempo issues and unhealthy combo plays and loops is basically what this deck is doing. And why this card specifically needs to get hit. The second card is obviously Digivolution Plugin S, because it's a plugin that's doing free Digivolutions. It's a hyper generic card, so yes, other decks can run it, but they don't have the ability to play it for free, unlike Sakuyamon. So they don't play it, and it's better off for them to play the Scrambles rather than Digivolution Plugin S, but this deck does both. So Digivolution Plugin S being essentially a free evolution for Sakuyamon just again causes lots of tempo issues and makes it way stronger than it reasonably needs to be. Then the last card on this list is going to be Rika. So Rika is just another good consistency card and extra memory gaining for free for you using your options for free. So now with the Taumon, let's just say you play Digivolution Plugin S and you have Rika on the field, you actually are gaining memory for Digivolving, which, if anything, the action should cost memory, not gain you memory. Granted, yes, it did take some setup to get there, but it wasn't particularly hard when Rika's able to find you all the parts and pieces, and you do have like other cards that you're playing for very cheap, like the Scrambles and the training cards, that you're just wasting your early turns finding all of the rest of your combo pieces to then just move out, combo off, lock the opponent out of the game, and then win the game the following turn with. So you could kind of see like why Rika would be in contention. I think this is one of the weaker hits. I don't know if I would rather just have one of the Sakuyamons get hit, but either way, it's just a very strong deck with lots of problematic cards, and it's kind of really hard to lock and narrow in on the biggest ones outside of the obvious Taumon from BT17. All right, so now that we're done with the top 3 decks, we still have to curve the top 5 decks because, as we've previously seen, these decks, which were good in the previous format and previous formats, they're not going away. So you kill the top 3 decks, and it's a reasonable assumption to make that, well, 4, 5, and 6, whatever the 6th slot is, might move up to then be the best decks, because we don't know the full implementations and impacts that BT22 is going to be having. So there's no reason for us not to continue playing older decks that are doing well if the newer decks already aren't necessarily competing as well as we reasonably would want them to. So as far as the picks from Imperial, obviously the last time they hit this deck, it literally didn't do anything. It was basically the biggest love tap in the history of the game. I guess technically the card draw is a little bit on the meaningful side, but like you're gaining the card draw a little bit too late because you already are in your big level 5 and 6 Digimon by the time you're gaining that card draw. It just means without Mirage that you're not afraid to run the card draw, but I think the memory gain is way worse and way more egregious, because if you're looking at what this deck is doing compared to the other BT16 DNA decks, it just has way more tools to be more obnoxious because of the fact that they have tools the others don't, which is that memory gain. So if you wanted to, you could hit the Davis and Ken to just kind of shut off that whole shenanigans. My alternative, if they're not going to touch Davis and Ken, is they're going to have to hit either the Stingmon or the XVmon from BT12 or both. Because again, as we can see with the other BT16 DNA decks, they don't have these types of tools. So if they had these types of tools, maybe those decks would actually do a lot better. But because they don't, they're less efficient in terms of the amount of memory that they're using. So less efficient means less good. And, well, yeah, obviously they're not doing super well. So if you're going to be hitting Davis Ken, then I don't necessarily think you need to hit the XV and the Sting. But if you don't hit the Davis and Ken, you need to hit the XV and the Sting, because the amount of memory that this deck gains for DNAing, just as I already mentioned with Sakuyamon, is just absolutely obnoxiously high, where you're essentially digivolving or hard playing a level 4 Digimon and then gaining like 3 or 4 memory back, making the action basically free, and in some cases actually gaining memory because of like play cost or digivolution reductions. So it's just way too much extra tempo. And again, similarly to Sakuyamon, what this deck is being used for is its engine to facilitate any level 6 floodgate to try to stop and limit the opponent's actions and then win the game the following turn. The other card on this list, which I know the Imperialdramon engine isn't using a whole lot, but it's still a semi-problematic card because of trash recursion and loops, is going to be the Wormmon from BT16, so that card can go away as well. So looking at the number 5 deck, we have Purple Hybrids. So Purple Hybrids, yes, is still good. It's essentially trying to do exactly what the Growlmon X deck is doing, and this is kind of like where you could see a lot of decks are covering the exact same strategies that a lot of other decks are. So if you were a Purple Hybrids player, you probably were off of Purple Hybrids playing the Growl X deck, because it's essentially doing the exact same thing that this deck is doing, where you're trying to get up into a level 4 or 5 Digimon, have that Digimon be deleted, and then just continue the aggression because you're triggering your on-delete effects, creating unhealthy loops and unhealthy gameplay. So yeah, it still needs some cards limited from it, but I think like the last ban and restriction list really did a good number on making it a little bit more fair. Granted, this is where hitting the promo Gallantmon would actually be effective, because this deck also uses that type of card for the same exact reasons, where it's just basically a zero-cost self-enabler on your on-delete effects, so that way you could get even more aggression out of the deck this way. So with promo Gallantmon being hit, that also would impact this deck as well. So again, that's why I don't necessarily think this deck needs that many more things. I think like Velgramon, if you really just want to kill off the viability of the strategy because he does kill himself most of the time, is a good way to stop the looping. Or you could just hit one of the Koichi Tamers. I think hitting the new Koichi Tamer probably is the smarter one, because that's enabling the loops. But if you really just want to limit their Koichis, hitting the BT7 one is probably fine. But I really think that hitting Ukomon is kind of like a necessary thing at this point, because it's not necessarily just this deck, but a lot of other hyper aggressively slanted decks that are using Ukomon to do exactly what the other Ukomon was kind of doing, where it's just presenting way too much pressure on the opponent, accelerating your raising area way faster than what they're actually able to respond with most of the time. So it's just still a highly problematic card. Yes, it's a good card in a lot of decks. Yes, a lot of decks will be impacted by this, but it's just too good of a card, and it kind of just needs to go, and it should help curve some other problematic decks as well. All right, so now that the big boys are out of the way, there's still probably some outside stuff from the top 5 decks that we really should be looking at. And based on Bandai's previous bans and restrictions, any of these cards reasonably do have the potential of showing up on the next ban and restriction list, or a ban and restriction list. So starting things off, we have the EX5 Nightclaw Lightfang duo tamers. Both of them are broken for various different reasons. I think that the EX5 4-cost one should probably go to 1, because the free Digivolution is strong, and as we've seen before, it's just been abused by so many other top ends where you're just playing this hyper generic package that uses this tamer to Digivolve for free into kind of any level 6 Digimon that can Digivolve off of their respective colors. And now that the deck actually has access to purple, it opens up the doors even further for the engine to be even more broken. And then when it comes to the 3-cost one, I think they just need to straight up ban this card, because it's just going to have so many choice restrictions due to the fact that anytime they print in all turns gain memory means that we could then try to figure out a way to use it in combination with this tamer because of the very unique timing of start of the opponent's turn. So it just leads to highly problematic gameplay, which is, again, one of the big reasons why they hit cards to begin with. And they can't just keep choicing restricting this card with so many cards. It gets to the point where it's just like, let's just get rid of it. And I think we're in a better spot now to just get rid of the 3-cost tamer and ban it outright, because we do have the promo Apollomon that still allows us to actually have access to DNA Digivolving into our Grace Nova. So yeah, those 2 cards could just take a hike. And when it comes to 0-cost options, we still have a couple of ones that are semi-problematic that we could potentially figure out ways to abuse, and are already trying to figure out ways to abuse. So as I already previously stated, with the promo Gallantmon being a on-delete self-enabler, that again leads a card like Parabolic Junk to be super easy to use, because, oh, I'm going to slap this ability on my Digimon, delete it with my promo Gallantmon, or whatever else is deleting your own Digimon, and then I'm just going to gain 2 free memory for nothing. So yeah, Parabolic Junk is going to be the next problematic card. More problematic than Tropical Venom, but people are already experimenting with Tropical Venom and finding ways to abuse that, as well as just another way to gain some additional memory for no actual investment. And this is kind of why I think Protoform also needs to go, because it's essentially the Hammer Spark for X-Antibody decks, and X-Antibody decks have proven to be highly problematic when they're good. Like, so yeah, Protoform is just another very strong card, and what makes me worried is we're technically getting a 3rd X-Antibody in the eventual future based on lore, because Protoform is X-Antibody weak, X-Antibody is normal X-Antibody, and then we have strong X-Antibody, which I don't know what they're actually going to call it, but yeah, we still have a 3rd X-Antibody that's probably going to be better than this card, and the other OG X-Antibody and this are already good. It's just this one's causing tempo issues, and it just needs to go. And speaking of semi-problematic cards, something from the purple and blue dog engines kind of need to go. They do have a history of hitting level 4 X-Antibodies, because the level 4s, like, a lot of the tempo issues stem from the level 3s and 4s doing a lot of tempo, like, control. So it's not unreasonable to think that out of everything in the purple dog engine, Doberman would get the hit. I think that's still kind of not enough, because that engine is still really strong, but hitting Doberman definitely might help curve it a little bit, just because the cycling's really good, and then the gaining memory when you're playing stuff out, which is what the Cerberus X is doing. So it's essentially in its own little package, triggering its own for basically no cost to it. Makes it really, really strong. Then you have the Blue Dog engine, which really isn't seeing a whole lot of play. It could still come up every now and then, but what's really breaking that engine kind of is the BT16 Gaomon, because it's essentially a free evolution. So again, tempo issues, free evolutions are very strong. Because you'll pair it up with the inheritable of like when you're drawing a card or when the opponent draws a card, gain a memory. So that way it's actually free. And then again, pair it up with the Nightclaw Lightfang engine. It's again just gaining you memory for essentially nothing. So it's just a huge problematic tempo card for a multitude of decks, which is why I think it should go. Plus the generic inheritable of jamming is also really strong. And speaking of other like hyperly strong tempo related issued cards, we have the BT14 Patamon. They already hit the TK, which set up the Patamon and made it more consistent. So now like it's a card that's less consistent, but again, it's still problematic for future design because anything that now is interacting with security and can rig security then makes Patamon like a broken card again, because gaining free memory for digivolving because his inheritable does see his start of main effect already is incredibly strong. And then you pair it up with something like a BT15 Gaudomon, which now you're gaining an extra memory because that would be the card you're digivolving into, is like absolutely ridiculous. Digivolving into a level 4 Digimon, gaining 2 memory, and then digivolving into a level 5 arguably for 1. So it just makes basically going into a level 6 and potentially not passing turn that much easier and faster. And I think like that's kind of an issue because as we could see, there's a lot of tempo issues with the game. And even with all of these cards getting hit, there's still going to be tempo issues with the game. And that's just the unfortunate reality of it. And one of the other big things that I probably would want to see, which might be out of left field for some people, is going to be the promo Destromon. Not because of its cost and its lack of availability, because of like the fact that, again, if you're curving the top decks, what's left, Destromon or Galacti was one of the more prominent decks, and the fact that he can have some very polarizing matchups because there's a lot of tamer heavy decks. This is one of the easier cards to loop and delete tamers and constantly keep deleting tamers, really means that anything using tamers is unplayable. And that's partially why the top decks are the top decks, is because if you actually took a look and noticed, the top 3 decks really aren't playing tamers. So that makes a matchup like Galacti a lot easier because they don't really have anything to worry about because they're not giving them anything to do and interact with. And all they just have to do is go faster than Galactimon, which is what they're currently doing. So yeah, it's just very easy to see without those 3 decks, Galactimon can very easily rise to the top and just hose on a wide variety of decks because there are a lot of decks that are relying on tamers. And this is where like limited tamer destruction is like good, but when it becomes too easy and recursive and reusable because Destromon also has his own little loops, yeah, it just becomes a little oppressive for some stuff, and that's why I think he should kind of go. And it's not like the deck doesn't have any Destromons to replace itself with, so yeah. But there are some last little things that I wanted to kind of touch on. I don't think any of these cards are reasonably going to get any kind of hits anytime soon, but they're definitely things that I think Bandai should be watching. Starting off with Karakurumon, obviously it's just another big tempo issue card. Being able to digivolve for free is really good. So yeah, the fact that getting up into it is cheap enough and then it digivolving for free into a level 6 Digimon will definitely make Puppets very, very strong on top of its protection ability, but that's on some of the other level 5s. It's more so the tempo issue of just digivolving to a level 6 for basically nothing. That's what makes this card super strong and definitely should be looked out for and watched. And then when it comes to some of the others, it's just strong, generic, big boss monsters. So Omnimon is just hyper annoying because he's basically like setting up his own little OTKs and not trying to interact with the opponent or leave the opponent the ability to unable to interact. So whether you're leaving the Garurumons or Greymons on the field, that leaves Miraculous to be abused, so that way they reasonably can't play around it. And then Omnimon Alter S, just when you go up into him, is uninteractable. So yeah, good stuff there. Speaking of uninteractability, that's kind of why Magnamon X and Gallantmon X are kind of on here, is because, like, not only are they some of the most dominating X antibody Digimon, like, being used in 3 colors means that all 3, or I guess technically 4 of those colors, now have to stop and think, is my X antibody actually better than any of these 2 cards? The answer to that most of the time is no. Spoiler, as we've seen in previous metadata. But yeah, it just limits what's actually being played from an X antibody standpoint, because they're not better than these, and these cards are both highly annoying and obnoxious to play against as well. Speaking of other hyper generic cards, we do have cards like Medieval Gallantmon and Chaosmon Folderarm that are 2 very powerful floodgates that are ran in a wide variety of decks. Chaosmon's a little bit more limited, but the fact that he has Partition, he's interacting with a lot of different colors, which, because more decks are multicolored at this point, makes him a very easy DNA to use, which is why I think Alphamon or Ryukin Ace is also a card to look out for, because again, it's just a very easy card to use when it comes to its DNA Digivolutions, because more decks are multicolored. And part of that is Medieval Gallantmon's fault, because Medieval Gallantmon is a card that can basically be ran in everything, just like Death Exmon, except he's way more oppressive and worse than Death Exmon, because you could DNA with him. He's a better floodgate, because he's actually a floodgate versus Death X, which is like a stopgap. So yeah, it's just creating this like little package that's like super hard for a lot of decks to deal with. And giving them easy access at really strong cards they reasonably wouldn't have the ability to play otherwise, which is like cool, but also breaks the game, which is why Digimon really has a problem with like hyper powerful generic cards. And speaking of hyper powerful generic cards, the last 2 is kind of the same, because this new egg design is incredibly dangerous to be playing with, because these eggs are the reasons why cards need to start getting banned more than limited to 1, is because these types of cards ignore the limited to 1 factor, because all you need to do is see it once. And then because of the high amount of recursion, not only specifically on these eggs alone, but on various other cards, it takes that limited to 1 and basically ignores that rule. So you could use the same card over and over again, like the Guilmon using Growl X over and over again, just as an example, assuming Growl X does get limited to 1, means that it's not really limited to 1, and the only place that you wouldn't be able to have access at it, at least for that deck, is going to be your security, because you're going to be milling your deck, you're going to be drawing cards, and yeah, it's going to eventually end up in the trash, so you could use it over and over again. And Tsunamon, even though I don't necessarily think anything from Adventures really needs to be hit outside of maybe this card and the black option, Our Courage, just because Our Courage is just another very hard card to deal with, but in certain situations it's not like unsurmountable, it's just annoying. But the Suno Egg being able to like do exactly what Guilmon is doing. If anything were to get limited, this basically just takes that limitation and ignores it. So I think this is a very highly problematic egg design that they really need to like watch out for. And it goes to like trash usage in general, because more and more things are being able to use the trash. And I think that's kind of an issue, because the game is slowly losing its own identity, because if everything's able to do everything, then what's the point of having colors to begin with? So, with all that said, do I think any of these changes will actually fix the game? No. Pandora's box has already been opened. It's kind of too late for Digimon to really want to course correct at least the approach that Bandai has been taking based on their last statement that they made in their developer notice when the developers and designers changed again. It really seems like they don't want to take that proactive approach, and they'd rather just lay back and kind of just see what happens and try to fix things if it's actually that big of an issue. So I don't necessarily think whatever they're going to do is actually going to fix the overall health of the game. Some people say, oh, the diversity of the amount of decks that are being played is great. But my counter argument, as I made in previous videos, is that like the diversity is at the cost of gameplay, where a lot of decks are boiling down to those 2 or 3 strategies of get into your high level body, win the game on the spot, or shut the opponent out from winning the game and then win the game the following turn. And the game's already moving progressively fast where we could easily achieve this as of turn 2 at the earliest usually. So yeah, the whatever they're going to end up hitting is just going to change whatever the best decks are, and we're just going to continue doing the exact same thing that we have been doing for a while, which I think is unfortunate because I do think that they still have the ability to course correct, and it seems like they're trying to course correct, but there's so many inherent problems with certain cards and card types and designs running around that it's really hard for them to actually fix the game. So, yeah, I don't necessarily think that these are going to really fix the game, but it'll definitely make the game better in the short term. So, looking at the long term, if they really wanted to fix the game, like as a good starting spot, limit or get rid of these types of cards. So the scrambles and the training cards are some of the most unhealthiest cards in the entire game. They are warping the game single-handedly around these cards, and they're not good cards for the game. So yeah, just completely get rid of these, and then the game can actually find a way to start healing. Yes, you might need to do some more bans and restrictions to kind of just bring everything back in line to what the game was without these cards. I think like memory boosts are fine because at least we could have like a floodgate to be able to get rid of these, and it's a little bit easier to run one floodgate versus 3 different floodgates depending on the different options that the opponent's playing and how they're going to be playing out their cards. So yeah, we just need, unfortunately, too many different rookie-like style floodgates to try to stop all of them, and we don't have the deck space and the ability to meaningfully run them because it's easier to run accelerants to our deck and make our deck better rather than deterrents and try to, like, counterpick and make the opponent's deck worse. You could say side decking might make this a little bit less of an issue, but if anything, again, certain decks operate better with side decks than others, and some decks can utilize their side decks versus others. So again, that creates that imbalance, which is why Digimon hasn't done it and isn't going to be doing it. So yeah, if you really want the game to actually start healing, these 2 specific styled option cards just need to completely go away. So I might do a video specifically on that later, but I feel like that's the place if you want to actually let the game start healing. So that is going to be it for my ban and restriction list predictions. Feel free down in the comments to tell me your ban and restriction predictions and your thoughts on anything that I said throughout this video. I know this was a little bit of a longer one because I do think there's a lot of problems with the game that need to be fixing, both from an individual deck perspective and a macro level game perspective. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they actually hit come August 23rd, 2025. I'm excited. I'll definitely be covering that. And yeah, hopefully if you liked and enjoyed this type of content, you already know what to do. Feel free to smash that like button, hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you can stay up to date when I upload or go live next. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Later.